afternoon, if you don't mind. So, merci beaucoup, Pierre. So, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. My name is Stephane Gagnon. I'm a professor at Université du Québec en Outaouais, UCO. We're based in Gatineau. And today, of course, we are in stream 3 of the conference. And in this session today, we discuss literally IT and transformation learning and generally speaking practice in higher education institutions. So the theme of my presentation today will be about an initiative in Canada that has existed for more than a decade now, called Business Technology Management, BDM, which for those who are Canadians and have graduated in a business school in Canada in IT management, you must be familiar with the name of that program. And the reason for this discussion today is because, as we saw the theme at DTIG, the theme is very much around what will happen to transformation in government. Will it become a regular practice and therefore digital transformation will no longer be a challenge and will become routine? Or will transformation evolve in some other form of professional practice? Are we aiming at creating a new profession dedicated to digital transformation, while most of the rest of IT management is focused on pure traditional management? So those questions have been raised by a lot of academics and also lots of people in practitioner communities. And that's the reason why the discussion today is relevant to the theme of the conference, which means we must ask ourselves what kind of training programs, what kind of professional, again, milieu we want to develop for digital transformation to actually become routine and a capability that is repeatable across different types of government agencies. So again, a discussion on a program that is very Canadian in its own way, but is now being opened up to the world. We'll discuss that further down. So in our presentation, I'll make sure to introduce the concept of BDM, what it is, of course, generally speaking, why it matters. Number 2, I'll discuss the difference between ITM and BDM, basically this conceptual framework moving from a merely information technology management to a truly business technology management, and what that implies also in terms of capabilities in any organization, whether private or public. And in the context of public sector, we'll have definitely more cases to be raised there. We also have a question in the third part as to what IT talent management should look like. Are we supposed to continue our traditional approach of relying on traditional HRM methods? Or should we have a more targeted approach to fill positions of digital transformation leadership with a great variety of roles, not just a generic role, but literally a role that is customized? And here comes the question of the public sector. Public sector transformation is not the same as someone who's led transformation initiatives in the private sector. So again, that raises the question, how do you manage your IT talent flow in those projects? The last item, 4, will be about the issue of uniting several streams of this profession. Many that are technical and many that are non-technical, and in between, of course, a spectrum of different levels of technology orientation. And to what extent do these professions together, separately still operated, could come together as a unified profession for transformation capabilities? And in the case of the public sector, again, this comes to the idea that if the public sector can serve as a test bed for such unification, the private sector is very difficult to coordinate hiring. They're very difficult to set standards for hiring. But in the public sector, the advantage is that because of this unity or unification or centralization of standards, it's more likely that such a unification could be more feasible in the public sector. We'll discuss that briefly. And in the conclusion, we'll discuss what's next for this initiative called BDM as it attempts to grow into a more robust, I would say, standard itself, and also accreditation standard. And at the same time, the initiative being also open to the world now. What can the world or different universities across the world expect from that kind of program? So let's just discuss first what we're talking about. That is this program called BDM. First of all, as I said, it is truly a Canadian initiative, which started, by the way, in 2009, led by the, it is difficult for me to remember the exact name of the organization in 2009. I think it was called ICT Skills Initiative. It was a nonprofit incorporated in Toronto that was created, if I recall, by a group of companies involving Bell Canada, but also faculty from Ryerson Polytechnic, my apology, Toronto Metro, and a few more faculty across Canada. And back then in 2009, the initiative was to say, what can business schools do better to improve the training of IT management graduates so that organizations across Canada are better prepared to lead IT in the next phase. Transformation back then in 2009 was not on the lips of anyone, but it was becoming clear that IT management was no longer a routine task because of cloud adoption, which started, because of course, major large ERP system implementations turning into a lower phase and basically more diverse type of vendors being adopted, and especially the possibility of having more seamless integration of web apps, the disappearance also of traditional hosted environment. All of these factors at the end of the 2005-2009 period created a momentum to ask whether or not IT management should evolve as well. And the question then was raised, why not distinguish that approach to IT management from the traditional one, which is clearly focused on information and technology? Then came the name, the trademark that you can see now today, BDM, which was, of course, gladly enough, reserved right away in both languages. So Gestion des Technologies d'Affaires, GTA in French, is the translation for BDM. This trademark was only registered very late in 2017 with CIPO, Canadian Intellectual Property Office, and also in the United States, by the way, by TechNation Canada, basically back then called, of course, Information Technology Association of Canada, ITAC. And the ITAC Talent Division, which was formerly this organization called ICT Skills Framework, had basically decided to launch a project to expand this accreditation process with universities, with business schools, particularly in universities. So the question came, as you see in point 2 here, to what extent should we effectively change the name of those programs? So information systems is the name of those programs. It has been for 30 years, and it is a very well-established community. For example, the Association for Information Systems, AIS, is the main association for faculty in business schools across the world. I believe the latest statistics was 1,500 members or more. So it is very obviously a very large community of faculty called IS faculty. And information technology is merely an extension in great part from IS, but is a bit closer to engineering practice, of course. However, IS and IT together represent the corpus of knowledge, the discipline, literally, that serves to train IT management personnel or IT managers. So rebranding those programs came to be a question in 2009, right away in the initiative. The question came as, would that create potentially a greater unification of the many streams behind IT management. So the IS discipline within business schools and the IT discipline in great part between business schools and engineering and CS, computer science, and also computer science, as well as traditionally software engineering, all those many disciplines all share a common interest to a different percentage, of course, a different degree, in training IT managers. So the question came then, to what extent could a rebranding initiate first a greater unification? And number two, more importantly, raise interest among the ranks of the best students in different schools. For example, of course, in business schools, it's traditionally the case that very, I would say, attractive careers such as finance, accounting, marketing attract most of the best students. And IT management struggles as one of the 10 disciplines in a business school normally, struggles to attract the best students because sometimes perhaps their acumen for digital technologies is not very strong, or they're not very attracted perhaps to the jobs that we offer in IT management. So the concept back then was that by rebranding the programs that we already had on, and by modernizing them, by bringing faculty to agree with a standard that is developed by the community through a consultation process that ITAC Talent led. From there, we saw a potential in 2017-18 to develop a stronger, again, a stronger profession, preparing our graduates toward positions of leadership in IT and transformation initiatives. And came to the issue clearly that stakeholders needed to change their mindset. We are no longer talking about information technology. We're talking truly about business in the sense that we're talking about creating new organizations, creating new products, new services, creating new ecosystems and value chains, conceiving mostly the benefits, strategic benefits of IT, as opposed to just managing information and managing technology, of course. So therefore, this mindset required in the same time, and that's the argument behind the initiative, the BDM initiative, it requires a change of attitude in the leadership. It's no longer just being very efficient and very effective at managing, let's say, a tight IT budget, for example, or managing procurement processes or maintaining very clear and effective relationship with vendors. It goes beyond that. Here are three basic, basic challenges of digital transformation and what it represents for the leadership position. For example, transformation implies that very often you are not so concerned about just enterprise architecture, and you're not just concerned about the basic idea of how will my solution work. You are focused, in fact, on innovation, trying to create from scratch very often, but trying to create and move forward the solutions, products, and services you're trying to innovate in. As well, it requires a focus on digital value, more than just value from cost reduction or traditional value of, oh, this functionality will be helpful for XYZ functionality, for XYZ operation, but digital value in the sense of course, impact on quality, impact on, of course, the position of your organization in its market or in its ecosystem. So strategic value, as we call it, the value defined from the revenue streams, but also the position and the risk management aspect of that value. All that focus requires a rethinking of how leadership in IT and digital transformation thinks of their role. This is therefore a more strategic role, more than just saying operationally, we should do XYZ in managing our information and IT technology. Number two item here, leaders of a full digital life cycle, which means a transformation, as probably many of you already know, of course, is not a unitary or punctual or segmented activity. It cannot be said that it's a project that starts and ends in one period. It unfortunately unfolds several phases. And more importantly, it creates the opportunity to coordinate or synchronize various projects. So transformations are typically, especially the public sector because of the size of them, transformation programs. So by definition, leadership in that context must have a very long or medium-term approach to managing these projects and programs of projects. And therefore, the leadership needs to change its mindset again. It is not just about procurement processes. It is not just about implementation or even just changing an organizational unit operations or processes. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond unitary segmented deliverables. So again, the concept of the scope of a transformation is something that changes the mindset again of leadership. Then the third item is the issue of the hybrid acumen, as we call it, which is obviously the capability to be excellent in management, and as well excellent in technology, but also excellent in business strategy. So those three facets, which are literally the name of the discipline called BDM, represent roughly the best way to, again, the word would be the best way to represent the challenges for digital transformation leadership. We see that there's a chat question, and we see that Mr. Stephen Donahue has joined. If I recall, Stephen, you're still online with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Stephen. We didn't wait for you because I wasn't too sure how long we would wait for you. My apology.
No, my apologies too. I was delayed by a minute or two, so I'm attentively listening to your presentation, Stephane, and I would encourage all attendees to ask their questions using the Q&A button.
That's very nice. Thank you very much. It's very efficient, in fact. So definitely, Stephen, at the end, hopefully you may have a question too. And the more important, hopefully you'll make it to that point too.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Stephen, do you mind if I ask you, the session has roughly about 45 minutes, if I recall. I suppose we leave a good 20 minutes at the end for discussion?
10 to 20 minutes.
Perfect.
Your
So
session officially ends at 2:15.
Perfect.
So somewhere around 2 o'clock or so, if you wanted to open it up to Q&A, that'd be great.
Thank you. Definitely. I'll make sure that I slide through right now. And so thank you very much. It's confirmed then that we do have a good 20 minutes ahead of us. And as you saw right now, in any case, I clearly identified the definition of the concept BDM. That is important because from there on, we understand why we're using the concept. And secondly, what changed in the mindset also of the educational programs that train our leaders. Comes now the question of further asking, what is the contents of the program? So basically, as we spoke about those facets that are evolving in transformation projects or programs, the kind of changes it causes to the IT leadership job. Automatically, a change in the job requirements comes with potentially a gap in talent. And the talent gap is not easily defined. A whole range of professionals and managers or project leaders are capable of handling different types of transformation initiatives, but will have deficiencies in varying sectors. Some of them will be less akin to strategic management process or strategic leadership process. Some others will be less strong, perhaps, in the issue of change management. So a whole variety of tasks to be performed in transformation programs will emerge as different gaps across different people and different professional careers. So the issue here is that one solution to solving this talent gap is to develop a more generic, again, a more generic approach to training leadership, IT leadership or digital leadership. And also the point is to make sure that these many disciplines that are extremely diverse, we're talking about business analysis, of course, we're talking about enterprise architect, we're talking about services management. All those different names we all know have different professional associations with bodies of knowledge or box. And therefore, to fill the talent gap in this common task called digital transformation leadership, and if we supply our leadership positions with those professionals from those different, of course, professional groups, we have to find a way to give them a common, I would say again, language or body of knowledge. And so also to effectively change their mindset individually as professions from being just information and technology management professions to be together a building block together of the broader issue of strategic business technology management. And again, focusing on the digital organization, processes, products, and services, and even ecosystems, value chains, and experiences. Now, that also led in parallel to another initiative. In 2017-18, started a project that I led actually at Université of Québec to develop a body of knowledge. It is effectively an open source, open access version of a kind of a map to the BDM discipline, and mostly aimed at very young and very beginners in the profession, just to give them a map for them to navigate the open access and open source material to learn and develop their own capability as well, to choose a degree, to choose a career, to choose training as well. So I'll describe that later a bit. However, this BDM BOK is technically an initiative that will never end because it's a framework. It's also a community for crowdsourcing that will restart activities after being suspended during the pandemic. However, as a result of all this discussion I've had so far with you, and this organization called again ITAC Talent back then, they succeeded at ITAC Talent to gather momentum among 22 and more colleges and universities in Canada. Many of them chose voluntarily to change the name of their programs and to be BDM instead of IS/IT management. And many of them actually went through a process, about a dozen, I think, went through a process of formal accreditation. Now, since about April 2022, the initiative for managing BDM in Canada has been taken over by KIPS, Canadian Information Processing Society, and the committee that used to be chaired by ITAC or later TechNation Canada, whose name we all know. Of course, KIPS being an accreditation organization because they already accreditate, of course, computer science. They accreditate, I believe, software engineering. They accreditate also diploma level or associate degrees in community colleges. And therefore, they were naturally initially involved in 2009, 10, 11, if I recall, from the history of this initiative. Initially, KIPS was responsible for accreditation. ITAC Talent took over the activity. Now, the activity is back at KIPS. And so the initiative continues to be in renewal phase after 12 months. It's been barely 12 or 13 months that the discussion has restarted. And KIPS is effectively reaching out to universities and colleges across Canada, making sure that we rethink the question of what do we want to do for this BDM profession in Canada? What will happen to our BDM programs? I see that we have chat questions as well. Stephen was reminding us to use the Q&A button to ask questions, of course. And definitely the Q&A button somewhere in our section is right next to the chat in the button bar. Considering now that this initiative in Canada is not young and also effectively is in renewal phase and can reach out to many of our 50 different business schools and most likely also 50 different computer science and software engineering schools, we have a question here in mind as to what value can all these schools share. Now, here in this case, we know that change in a profession like IT management in general is not easy to accomplish because, of course, different segments of this profession, or each of them at different phases of evolution, are effectively so diverse that it's difficult to come together and share a common language. But definitely those three objectives here are definitely shared by all. First of all, each professional group is concerned about coaching the next generation of digital leaders. Number two, they're concerned about ensuring a strong technology and management and business acumen, so a hybrid acumen. And they're all concerned about the issue of moving forward toward more strategic and business strategy roles for IT management and digital transformation leaders. This objective is shared by so many professions in IT management. You can see here 20 of them. At the right hand, you obviously know all the names of all these different, again, competency standards, as well as certification and bodies of knowledge. And the question remains, with 20 and plus more professional groups, how do you get them together to work around a single language and to, of course, think differently about talent management in their different professions and around the common profession that they share, which is the digital transformation leadership profession. And therefore, this has led to a rethinking again of how we manage our talent and to contrast with traditional HRM. So I will not go deep here, but however, indeed, the BDM community in Canada, from its history from 2009 to 2022, had a great degree of, I would say, there was ups and downs in terms of availability of personnel to manage this initiative, as well as funding for the initiative. Also in Canada, across Canada, there was a quite variety of different schools with different interests in pushing that forward. So from the past 12 months, 2022 to 2023, there's been a change in structure. So the BDM Forum is the group within, effectively, the BDM Council is a group within KIPS that takes care of accreditation. And we have delegated to a nonprofit that I created personally called Digital Innovation Foundation, the task of managing the international expansion part, which is basically everything that happens outside Canada. And the challenge remains with the history here of accreditation efforts across Canada and also efforts to develop new program contents. There are learning opportunities for programs elsewhere. So therefore, it's very likely that within a few months, perhaps hopefully within the year, we will see a kind of resurgence in interest across schools in Canada, especially interest to learn from one another and share that learning elsewhere across the world also. So apart from the change in how the initiative works, also the scope of the initiative will evolve. Here you have a picture of how many things must be included in any digital transformation leadership program. By leadership program, we really mean something close to the end of undergrad and beginning of graduate studies. Think about this as a middle ground between a program that certifies a bachelor plus some continuing education program that comes together and complements that. And the scope of training, of course, as you can see it here, goes from the hardcore of technology to information to IT management and IMIT, as we call in federal government, and especially digital transformation strategy itself, which involves internal and external facets of the enterprise. So because that scope is very wide, again, it changes the quantity of material being taught in our programs. That is an obvious particularity. You cannot just teach a basic course. You must teach that course in relationship with others, plus the broader objective of preparing those students to become capable to manage a digital product of some sort. So again, the scope varies in terms of how much jobs are evolving. Now, here you have the basic picture of traditional jobs in IT management. And on the left, you have the more business-oriented ones, and on the right, the more technology-oriented jobs. And as you can see in the middle columns, you have some certain ratio that you can guess work here. And that I gave it, of course, myself here as a guessing game. But technically, you do recognize that IT function management are clearly management jobs. And therefore, they involve way more concerns about budgets and HRM and strategy and governance and compliance than they do with implementation, of course. So therefore, the 90-10 or 80-20 kind of ratio is very likely a good depiction of the situation. Meanwhile, application management is not so much about business and management, but it's about understanding the product. 70% is mostly capability and certification, of course, to manage a product. So therefore comes the question, in between that, you have a spectrum of, again, the hybrid acumen, as we call it. And what will happen to those jobs? Well, they're changing already. Those names are slowly evolving. You have new jobs, of course, being opened in the data science sector with chief data architect, which is, of course, a very fancy name and exciting position, of course. But technically, it comes with a whole spectrum of different roles at different levels, from analytics to, more generally speaking, of course, people who are responsible to create value out of data. And not just data engineers, but we're talking about literally transformation specialists that extract great business opportunity from data. And so, again, the concept here is this hybrid acumen is not an easy thing to develop in any of those positions, in any of those careers. Number two, the challenge of planning ahead for the next 3-5 years when we don't even know how the picture of the demand for talent will look like in 3-5 years. Those are uncertain unknowns, and some are called known unknowns, and some are called literally unknown unknown, or true uncertainty. And therefore, it creates a challenge for schools. We, as universities and colleges, we evolve in cycles of 3 to 5 years. And we generally have a program that was approved 2-3 years ago, and we have to make do with the program contents we have at that time. So it's difficult to synchronize our educational system with the job that you can see right here in our, of course, operational environment, whether public or private. And in the public sector, they change less often than the private sector. And then to synchronize all this with the different careers and capabilities of the talented individuals you wish to hire in those positions. So the synchronization will not happen easily. We all know that. The challenge remains, how do you get every parts of the system to work together? And again, faculty as well as the students and programs are just eager to know exactly how to evolve and how to meet better the demands of course, hiring managers and organizations in everywhere. The public sector is one of the big consumers of transformation initiatives, and therefore one of the big places where our students must end up working. Anyway, this is a picture, again, of the scope of the problem. And then again, this particular spaghetti diagram, which I'm not going to dig into, is only a map of the different relationships between the 15 different competency domains in BDM. I will not explain that. It's explained in the text of the BDM book. I just wanted you to get the glimpse of course, the complexity of our profession, effectively. Changing organizations by, of course, leveraging IT and digital technologies is not an easy task. And therefore, anyone wanting to make such an implementation or such an initiative anywhere from scratch to the result must necessarily manage and especially master so many of these different disciplines that we must be aware of the many relationships between these disciplines. And in the end, here is at least a picture that is a bit more understandable, is the set of criteria. They number in 75 criteria. And strangely enough, at the right hand, they end up with 7.5, which is by chance. So there are 75 criteria to evaluate programs. To what extent the programs that are graduating our future IT managers are capable to fulfill that job. And this particular accreditation process has been used in Canada for several times. There's a phase by which this particular version 2.0, which was published in the winter of 2016, there's a process of renewal that will start soon. And within about a year, we should have a version 3.0, hopefully. It will change roughly the logic behind it, but the items themselves may not evolve dramatically. So, and the BDM BOK, or the Body of Knowledge Initiative, is roughly to feed material to that process of certification development. So I would skip through. This is only a picture of the BDM BOK itself, just the mapping. It's difficult for me to explain every part because effectively you can think of this as the same logic as you find all the time, the project management body of knowledge or the business analysis body of knowledge. BABOK and PMBOK and many other BOKs all have the basic purpose of mapping their profession and providing some map that will be reusable by different groups, whether specialists or whether people who enter newly in a profession or in a professional group. And in this case, basically, the purpose of this BOK for BDM in general is to integrate the three facets, the business, the technology, and especially the management part, the action of leadership of those transformation initiatives. So of course, chapter 2 is crucial. That's where we define, broadly speaking, how transformation initiatives can be led, not must, but can. And number 3, the practices, which are the 15 different domains of knowledge that are truly essential. You remove one of them and you're already short of a lot of knowledge necessary to accomplish effective transformation initiatives. And all the others are coming together to support these two. So number 2 and number 3 are supported and supporting the other. 4, 5 are the different disciplines, and 5 the different contexts or life cycles where BDM is practiced. And then the careers that are, of course, within BDM emerging as the dominant and most popular ones. And 7 is a set of standards, whether at individual level, program level, or organizational level. So accreditation of programs, benchmarking of organizations, and certification of individuals. So basically, those standards come together to feed into the career and the transformation, again, streams of the profession. Then comes the question of, will we have a unified profession? Well, the issue of program development in universities is very often led by a question, do we have a profession out there where our graduates will join and they will feel fulfilled and they will also come back to us for graduate degrees very often, hopefully, but they will come back to us and say, this is wonderful. Your preparation led me to a great career in a profession that has a great identity. Well, that is not, again, an instantaneous process. Again, today, 2023, we still don't have a unified profession for digital transformation. We still have those 20 plus different silos that do not have alliances with one another and barely share very often their bodies of knowledge. And in most instances, as a professional, if you want to be really fulfilled, you must take at least 2 or 3 of these different bodies of knowledge and master them and get certified. Again, the question remains, to what extent can we strengthen the birth of this particular discipline and profession? These are open questions. I'm not going to discuss exactly how to. We can discuss that later in a few minutes. But definitely the question remains of how to create an ecosystem here of, for BDM professionals at the core, you people, hopefully, if you don't mind me pointing fingers, being at the core of an initiative where university programs, of course, bring knowledge and competencies, but at the same time benefit from your, of course, job development and practice standards that eventually become part of accreditation standards and eventually become learning outcomes and criteria for occupational standards. So this little ecosystem needs to be developed. It will require time. And that's where we are at today in 2023. Even in Canada, with a good 10 years of experience developing and accrediting programs, the organizations involved in that process yet have to develop the resources and the personnel to do that kind of task. That's an open question of how this is going to be done, especially for the public sector, how the public sector, again, can serve as a test bed or even a leading organization to play a part in this process. And again, this particular ecosystem can be broken up or blown up into smaller bits, and it creates a very complex environment within which to share that knowledge base. Now, at the end, different stakeholders on the left hand will have different benefits from whether we have a common joint BDM buck or common certification environment, whereas, of course, you continue to have many professional certifications, plus the BDM certification that may serve as a capstone, if you wish, and then the BDM community itself, if we can actually build a profession with a unified identity. So that's it for me in terms of the initiative itself. I wanted to make sure you have a glimpse of the whole concept behind the word, the acronym BDM. Secondly, the question of where do we go from here? The initiative, again, as I repeat, is still in development, still in rebirth after the pandemic. And number two, we need professional and especially executive leaders to come to us and say, we want to build a group, an advisory group of people who've seen it in the field. There is a lack of integration of our profession. And here's how we professionals or executives can help you faculty and other groups build such a profession. So the question is open today, to what extent we may find some volunteers. So thank you very much, Stephen, for the time you gave me. I think, as you said, 15, 20 minutes at the end, we can chat, isn't it?
Yes, Stephane, thank you very much for an excellent, thought-provoking presentation. I would encourage everyone to ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We have a couple here. Number one, hi, the public and private organizations implementation of digital transformation using TOGAF enterprise architecture. What is the right path to achieve the digital transformation?
Thank you. Excellent start. Definitely. Well, of course, we have all read TOGAF in versions that are so different in over 2 decades. It's been many years myself, by the way, that I don't dig into the documents anymore in TOGAF. For enterprise architecture itself, I think, I'm not sure if architects will admit it, but there has been a tremendous evolution in the role of EA in transformation projects. I recall vividly in 2005, I was at an open group meeting. I think it was, it was actually a group that was created in parallel with the open group and OMG, actually, called the Integration Consortium. I'm not sure if some people may remember the name. Integration Consortium was a group of professionals who wanted to work with the open group and OMG to develop, again, this broader community of digital transformation, which was not called by this name at that point, it was integration. And the question here that is asked is literally the one that was discussed on the agenda back then in 2005. And it was a group with which I worked a bit as a volunteer. And I must admit to you today, when we claim that enterprise architecture is essential, we have to look around in our IT branch, the CIO branch of any organization. And we must admit, as much respect as we do pay for EA capabilities, is it truly relied on extensively? Or is it more an remaining isolated capability that we consult as a reference point in most of our programs of projects, but we do not make a necessity and a central part of our decision-making process? I would say that needs to be verified carefully. But my guess, again, half of faculty work, by the way, is guesswork, because we don't live in the field like you guys and ladies in doing the real work, but we are, of course, observing. Now, from what I observe is that EA must come back in the center of decision-making. It must. There's no choice because of the complexity of transformation programs. So the question is, of course, timely, and secondly, a good fit for the needs out there. However, we must remember and hopefully acknowledge professionals running these projects rarely have sufficient exposure to EA capabilities and EA tools and even EA practices and certifications, let alone that. So therefore, again, it comes to the issue of training. It comes to the issue of preparing our talented people. You have the best and most talented and creative people, but they have no exposure to EA. How do you fill that gap? Therefore, the way forward is to identify clearly the gaps, talent gaps, to make sure programs are truly customized to each person, get employers to invest in their people, target EA and several other disciplines together, make them part of a single body of knowledge and a single language and a single profession, and make sure they are no longer discarded or rather kind of pushed aside like they have been. EA has been pushed aside for more than a decade, technically. That would be my guesswork answer today to this question.
Thank you for that, Stephane. We have another question.
Please.
How do we spot professionals who have these hybrid skill sets? And how do we translate that into job descriptions and evaluations?
Thank you. It's absolutely perfect. This is actually the question that comes back every time I make a presentation. So this person, Brittany, is perfectly right on. I have no perfect answer to this. I just spoke here a minute ago about the fact that some discipline area like EA or some others like even BPM has been neglected. Many disciplines within IT management have been kind of neglected by different groups. So therefore, again, we cannot judge without having a full picture. Can you? That's the question. I hope you would have an answer to this. From what we observe, if you take a single or two or three sub-professional groups, let's say business analysis, enterprise architecture, and roughly, again, perhaps project management, let's say. This is only 3 of 20. Would you like to claim that you have, as a group of professionals, the full picture of what needs to be done for transformation? It's unlikely that you do, to be honest. So therefore, I'd say the answer to this question is, first, get a full picture. Number 2, in fact, test your people, evaluate them against that full picture, not just against 1 or 2 or 3 boxes, but against a reference box that will include many more, perhaps hopefully a connection to all of them. Number 3, the question of how to recognize when you evaluate. Definitely, it's about scaling those capabilities. How do you actually say, oh, yeah, you have enough exposure to EA, and you have enough tools that you master, and you have enough experience in XYZ deliverables in X projects? Well, if you leave it as a guesswork each time, well, you end up with a great variety of errors, of course. You discover that you had granted someone's leadership to a group of 20 people, but they, after claiming they had enough exposure to EA, discovered that their decisions are not exactly a good reference to EA practice. They're not relying on tools. They have the tools, and is the most frequent event that we have in IT management. You have the tools, you know how to use them, but you're not very creative in using them. So technically, I feel, if Brittany, I don't know if that is a good answer for what you wanted, but technically you have to develop an organization level capability to detect these people, but considering the needs of your organization. In a big agency like CRA, for example, in the federal government, the odds are enterprise architecture is a huge necessity because half of your infrastructure works on Z-series machines, and then you still have to understand data sets and data consumption from different types of environments. Whereas if you go to another agency with smaller scale, where everything is cloud, you have, again, another set of demands. So these demands and these expectations or requirements need to be specialized and specified to each organization. So each organization has to develop their capability to have an IT talent, a digital talent framework and reference model. But again, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 of 20 taking over the whole agenda, I'm so sorry, we're still shooting ourselves in the foot. None of these many 20 different disciplines and professional groups should lead any others. They should all come together and share a common language. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more before we break for coffee.
Thank you.
Thank you for this very illustrative and thoughtful presentation. A BTM program should focus in a potentially integrated future hypothetical be okay? It's more of a question.
Yep.
Although ITIL and PMBOK frameworks have been expanding their scopes, as an example.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Yes, indeed, you're right. Each one of those 20 plus groups have a different level of maturity and also a different speed of renewal. Some have renewed every 3 years, some have renewed every year almost. For example, also IASA, the International Association of Software Architects. It's based in Austin, Texas, but it has chapters across, I think, 60 different cities across the world. They have succeeded at renewing every 6 months their body of knowledge, and they have made it as also open access with a certain number of constraints, no use in commercial context, but you cannot make money with their buck as a consulting group, for example. But however, clearly different groups have different capabilities. The question is not so much the freshness of each of these renewals, nor the broadening scope. The problem is not the supply. The problem is the consumption. So I don't know, Edwin, if you agree. Please send me an email if you agree or disagree. It'd be a pleasure to discuss that personally. But I suspect that the supply will not evolve dramatically. And therefore, as consumers of those assets, we may and should not expect dramatic changes in that realm. Instead, though, we can change the way we consume those products. Of course, bodies of knowledge, reference material, and of course, certification environments and cycles. We as consumers, especially hiring managers, public sector, because you are very systematic and very wide scale hiring processes, you have a better leverage in changing that approach compared to a mid-sized company in the private sector where they don't have much capability to change HRM and they are not market makers, they're market takers. Public sector is a market maker and they have leadership. They can have a leadership position in defining their requirements. Now, if requirements remain locked into 1, 2, 3 bodies of knowledge and all the others are neglected, then therefore the answer is no matter how far each one of those many associations go, none of them can cover the whole scope, none, because they make a deliberate choice not to. So therefore, consequently, I think it's inevitable. Those who are the consumers of that kind of assets, especially employers, and again, I repeat, public sector would be a perfect leading community for that, must take the lead and demand more unification. And by demanding unification, someone in the supply stream, different professional groups, will say yes, will make the effort. And this effort will make sure that somehow those many professional groups they don't need to federate, but they will definitely recognize, here's the common reference model we share together. We are separate, we continue certifying differently, but we are evolving our certification requirements and expectations. And in the same way, trying to meet the needs of those, again, consuming organizations, employers, who will have very clearly specified a unitary and single-minded professional vision is not enough. You cannot just have 1 or 2 or 3 out of 20. You have to have a more unified version. I think in the end, the situation of today, which is still a locking event, we're all stuck, separate silos, it will not be maintained. It cannot be maintained because out there, big organizations will say, please change that approach. Give us something more unified. And if you don't do it, we'll do it ourselves. That's what I expect.
Merci, Stephane. You finished right on time. I thank you very much for taking the time, sharing your depth of knowledge, your experiences with us. Truly an outstanding presentation. So it's time for a coffee break. I'd like everyone else to select whatever sessions you want to come back and join us at 2:30.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.